The Ashcroft family's monthly dinners had never really been about the meal itself. They were a stage for showing off money. And tonight, at the sprawling estate just outside Napa Valley, the performance was shaping up to be more insufferable than usual. I settled into my familiar spot near the fireplace, watching quietly as my cousins jostled for bragging rights. "I just closed on a ranch in Jackson Hole," Preston announced, swirling his wine glass with practiced ease, right next door to one of Silicon Valley's biggest names. Cassandra rolled her eyes and snapped open her designer clutch. "Please," she said, "we picked up a vineyard in Tuscany with private waterfront access to the Mediterranean. You simply cannot put a number on a view like that." I pressed my lips together, hiding a smile behind my glass of iced tea. If only they had any idea. "Nora," Aunt Evelyn's voice sliced through the chatter, "you've barely said a word tonight." Preston leaned forward, oozing false concern. "We were just curious about your living arrangements." And there it was, right on cue. "What about them?" I asked, setting my glass down calmly. "That tiny duplex in Portland," he pressed. "Still renting, isn't that right?" "The place on Alder Street," Cassandra chimed in, feigning shock. "I didn't realize people our age still rented." I nearly burst out laughing. That Alder Street building was the very first commercial property my company, West Pine Holdings, had ever acquired. To them, I was just a tenant scraping by. In truth, I owned the whole complex. "I'm comfortable where I am," I said evenly. "You're 35, sweetheart," Evelyn added with a condescending smile. "It's time to grow up and invest in something real." "Real?" "Try a portfolio worth nearly $2 billion, spanning apartment complexes, office towers, and yes, this very building, Ashcroft Plaza, where they were all gathered right now. 6 months earlier, I'd quietly acquired it through a private equity structure, one designed so it could never be traced back to me. "I've done just fine for myself," I replied. Preston smirked. "You can't even afford a mortgage." I leaned back and let them keep talking, because soon enough the lease renewal paperwork would land on their desks, and they'd finally see whose signature was on it. My father glanced up briefly from his wine glass. "Easy now, Preston. Not everyone was born with your killer instincts." "Nora made her own choices," Aunt Evelyn added with a sigh, as if I'd let the family down by not landing a hedge fund husband or becoming some influencer. They pictured me spending my days dragging broke grad students through cheap walk-up apartments, barely surviving on commission. What none of them realized was that Nora Hale, the supposed family disappointment, was also the invisible force behind West Pine Holdings, the firm that had spent a decade quietly buying up residential and commercial property across the entire Pacific Northwest. "Speaking of real estate," Cassandra cut in, her eyes lighting up, "did you hear about that mess on Alder Street? Some company bought up the whole block. They're planning to tear it all down," she added with mock sympathy. "Guess that little apartment of yours is finally getting the boot." I kept my face perfectly still. I was the one who'd bought it, and demolition was the last thing on my mind. The Alder Street complex was a genuine treasure, original brickwork, vintage character, and long-standing protections for the families who'd called it home for decades. I was in the middle of a careful, historically respectful renovation. "Really?" I asked innocently, hadn't heard a thing. "Of course you haven't," Preston smirked. "Deals of that size are way outside your world." "If you do get thrown out," Evelyn chirped, "you can always move into the guest house. We'll help you find something a little more respectable, maybe even someone respectable too." "I'm fine," I said flatly, "and so is my landlord." Cassandra let out a tight laugh. "You can't live small forever, dear. The Hale name used to actually mean something." It still did, just not in the way any of them understood. Within real estate circles, West Pine had become known for ethical growth and tenant-first values, the polar opposite of my cousin's flashy projects that leveled entire neighborhoods for attention. Actually, my father said, setting his glass down, part of tonight's meeting is business-related. The board is worried about the new owner of Ashcroft Plaza. I tilted my head slightly. Oh? West Pine Holdings bought a controlling stake 6 months ago, he continued. Nobody knows who's behind it. Possibly some overseas investor. Preston nodded confidently. Has to be. Those types love scooping up legacy properties like this. If only they knew their so-called mystery investor was sitting right there in a thrifted cardigan and worn-out boots. And now, my father went on, they're asking hard questions, particularly about our accounting. Creative accounting, like the building maintenance fund Preston quietly borrowed against to finance his Jackson Hole getaway, or the designer handbags Cassandra wrote off as client engagement expenses. I'm sure it's nothing serious, Aunt Evelyn said, fidgeting with her pearls. The Hale name still carries weight. That's exactly the problem, my father cut in. This West Pine person doesn't seem impressed by names at all. They've ordered a complete audit. I watched panic ripple quietly across their faces, barely concealed behind practiced, expensive smiles. An audit wouldn't just expose a few questionable expenses, it would blow their entire operation wide open. Maybe Nora could help, Cassandra suggested suddenly. Syrupy sweet. She's in real estate, isn't she? Maybe she knows someone at the management company. Suddenly, every eye at the table turned to me. I was no longer an embarrassment. I was potentially useful. I mostly handle smaller residential clients, I said smoothly. Nothing on the scale of Ashcroft Plaza. For God's sake, Preston snapped. You can't even help your own family. My mother shot him a warning look, but her silence spoke volumes. Even my father went back to scrolling on his phone, uninterested in coming to my defense. None of them had any idea just how much help I was about to provide, just not in the way they were hoping for. By tomorrow morning, West Pine Holdings would issue a public statement. Effective immediately, Ashcroft Plaza would be undergoing major operational reform, no more hidden budgets, no more contracts handed out to family, no more treating the building like a personal credit card. I glanced around the penthouse, artwork paid for with maintenance money, couches marked up 3 times their real value, fixtures installed by Cassandra's husband's company at wildly inflated prices. Anyway, I said, standing and brushing off my jeans, some of us have early mornings. Cassandra smirked, off to show more rent-controlled studios? I slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder. Inside it sat the board briefing, legal documents, and renovation plans worth more than everything in that room combined. Oh, Nora, Aunt Evelyn called out sweetly. Next time try dressing a bit more like a Hale. Appearances do matter. I smiled. Don't worry, I said. Tomorrow I'll look exactly the way the Hales expect. They still had no clue I was already the one calling every shot. If you've been quietly rooting for Nora this whole time, stay tuned for what happens the moment those boardroom doors swing open. Subscribe now so you don't miss how this family reacts when they realize the nobody they wrote off is the one holding all the keys. The next morning, I walked into my real office, an entire penthouse floor overlooking downtown Portland, ready for the moment I'd spent over a year building toward. My assistant, Layla, walked in briskly and placed a cappuccino beside my laptop. The Ashcroft Plaza board is already seated, she said, and your family arrived early, trying to charm the independent board members. I couldn't help but picture Preston and Cassandra working the room in sheer desperation. Audit packets ready? All printed and distributed, she confirmed. The forensic team found even more than we expected. She paused. Are you certain you want to go through with this? Once it's out, there's no walking it back. They need to understand, I said quietly. that legacy is not a license to abuse power. I turned toward the glass, catching my own reflection. Gone were the jeans and cardigan. Today I wore a sharp navy Altuzara suit, clean lines with quiet strength, the kind of outfit Aunt Evelyn once dreamed I'd wear to meet a husband. Instead, I'd wear it to take apart their entire house of cards. The ownership announcement goes public in 20 minutes, Layla added. Once it drops, there's no more hiding who you are. Then let's begin, I said, lifting my briefcase. The Ashcroft Plaza boardroom fell silent the moment I walked in. My family sat clustered at the far end, rattled and clearly underdressed for what was coming. "Who are you?" Preston barked. "This is a private meeting." I calmly set my briefcase down at the head of the table. "I'm Nora Hale," I said, "founder and sole owner of West Pine Holdings, the company that owns this building. Along with several others, your family has been illegally exploiting." Evelyn went pale as a ghost. Cassandra's mouth opened, but no words came out. My father's grip tightened around his pen. "Nora," he breathed. I nodded. "Good morning," I said, opening my briefcase and sliding audit reports across the table. "Shall we go over your finances?" "This is absurd," Preston stammered. You're just—" "What?" I asked calmly. "The black sheep. The renter. The woman in second-hand clothes." Cassandra blinked in disbelief, but "You show apartments for a living." "I work," I said simply. "And I built something real. Something built on integrity, not illusion." The board watched in stunned silence as the once proud Hale family began unraveling page by page. "These folders," I explained, "document every misused fund, every inflated invoice, every falsified receipt." "Preston, care to explain the $2 million in supposed roof repairs that quietly financed your Jackson Hole property?" His face flushed so violently I thought he might actually collapse. "Or Cassandra," I continued, flipping to the next page. "Maybe you'd like to walk everyone through why your husband's company billed triple the market rate for basic plumbing work. You'd really expose your own family like this." Aunt Evelyn gasped. "No," I said evenly. "You exposed yourselves. I'm simply making sure it gets cleaned up properly." My father finally spoke, his voice low and pleading. "Nora, sweetheart, we can explain." "Don't," I said, raising a hand. "I've watched this family treat our great-grandfather's legacy like a personal ATM machine. And while you mocked what you thought was my modest little life, I was quietly building something far better, rooted in values instead of vanity." "But why?" Cassandra asked, clearly dazed. "Why pretend to be struggling?" "I never pretended anything," I answered. "I lived simply and invested wisely. You all just assumed real wealth had to be loud." "The Alder Street building," Preston said, stunned. "You actually live there." "I own it," I corrected. "And most of that block, and no, I have no plans to tear it down. Because some of us actually care about people, not just returns." Suddenly, phones around the table began buzzing at once. One board member glanced down at his screen and read aloud, "West Pine Holdings reveals CEO's identity. Nora Hale, estranged member of the Hale family, confirmed as owner of a $2 billion real estate portfolio." Evelyn fumbled with her phone. "Ranked among the most ethical developers in the country," she muttered. "Historic preservation. Tenant protections." "This is going to ruin us," Cassandra whispered. "Ashen." "No," I said firmly. "This is going to save you from yourselves. Effective today, Ashcroft Plaza operates with full transparency. No more shell games, no more sweetheart deals. And if we refuse to comply..." Preston tried to sound tough, though his voice cracked. I smiled. "Then I hand these reports straight to the authorities. I imagine the IRS would find them fascinating reading." The room went completely still. "What do you actually want?" my father finally asked. "I want you to remember what the Hale name meant before all of this," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Our great-grandfather built communities, not just profit margins." I rose and gathered my papers. "You have a choice," I said evenly. "Work with me to rebuild that legacy, or go find somewhere else to live. I hear Lake Oswego has some lovely rentals available." I turned to leave. "Nora, wait." My father's voice stopped me right at the door. I was wrong about you." "Yes," I said quietly, "you were." What followed felt like something straight out of a corporate drama. The press couldn't get enough of the story. Portland's hidden heiress, who'd built a real estate empire in secret, and then dismantled her family's carefully constructed lies in a single board meeting. Aunt Evelyn stepped down from 3 local boards, too humiliated to show her face in public. Cassandra's husband's firm folded within weeks of the audit going public. But not everything that followed was bitter. Preston, finally facing real consequences, enrolled in a real estate program at a public university. Cassandra began volunteering at a downtown transitional housing shelter, later telling me it gave her more genuine purpose than any gallery opening ever had. And my father, he asked to learn the business, not as a father trying to reclaim control, but as a student wanting to understand exactly what I'd built. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Alder Street apartment. Yes, I kept it, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Ashcroft Plaza was thriving, leases were stable, tenant satisfaction had climbed, and the small retailers on the ground floor were finally turning healthy profits. A knock at the door interrupted my focus. I opened it to find my mother standing there, dressed in jeans, no makeup at all. It took me a second to process how unfamiliar that casualness looked on her. "I got your invitation," she said, holding it up. "A holiday party at the courtyard." I nodded. "It's not exactly your usual scene," I said. "No," she admitted, glancing around my modest apartment. "But I'm starting to learn that maybe scene isn't everything after all." She picked up a photo of me at 23, beaming at my real estate license ceremony. "I never asked," she said quietly, "why you chose this path." "Because I wanted to build something real," I told her, "not just buy something and show it off." "And now," she murmured, "you control more than all of us combined." "I do," I nodded, "but control was never the goal. Purpose was." She looked at me with real seriousness. "Will you teach me?" "Come tonight," I said. "Meet the families who've lived here for decades. Listen closely. That's where legacy actually begins." Later that evening, I stood by the window watching the lights flicker across Portland, the city I'd quietly made my own. Ashcroft Plaza glowed in the distance, no longer a monument to greed, but a symbol of restoration. Below me, the Alder Street building hummed with quiet life, its original brickwork, wooden beams, and garden courtyards carefully preserved. My phone kept lighting up with new messages, partnership offers, speaking invitations, acquisition proposals. West Pine Holdings was in high demand now, but I kept my schedule grounded and my routine humble. Success, to me, was never about outshining my past. It was about building something that actually mattered, something meant to last. Sometimes the person everyone pities becomes the one they end up learning from. And sometimes the loudest kind of victory isn't loud at all. It simply endures. A week later, at the Alder Street holiday party, I stood near the garden fountain watching my family slowly adjust to a world they'd once dismissed entirely. My mother sat beside Mrs. Lopez, a resident of 38 years, listening intently. Preston helped string lights alongside Mr. Keller our longtime World War II veteran tenant. Cassandra laughed beside a table of kids decorating sugar cookies. Slowly, they were all starting to understand that real wealth was never about what you could flaunt. It was about what you protect, what you share, and what you help lift up. My father joined me near the cocoa table. You know, he said, your great-grandfather always believed buildings should shelter hearts, not just line pockets. I nodded. I found his old ledgers, I said, handwritten notes about protecting tenants. We forgot all of that somewhere along the way. He looked at me then, not like a daughter who'd wandered off course, but like someone who had picked up a torch he'd let fall. You could have destroyed us, he said. That was never the point, I answered, watching a little girl twirl beneath the string lights. I wanted to build something that would outlast me completely. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving people wrong, it's showing them a better version of what's right. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly written off by people who should have believed in you, then maybe there's a piece of my story in yours. I never set out to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to build something real, something no one could take away because it was rooted in values instead of vanity. If this story meant something to you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my place. Tell me what you've quietly built while everyone around you doubted you. Let's give each other credit for the silent work, the long nights, and the hard choices nobody sees. And if you're standing at a crossroads, like the one I once faced, when the world expects nothing from you, don't shout louder, just build stronger. You don't need anyone's approval to start. You need purpose and consistency. Everything else will follow. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories ahead about resilience, redemption, and redefining success entirely on your own terms. Because legacy was never about what you inherit, it's about what you choose to create. And sometimes the sweetest kind of revenge isn't revenge at all, it's simply becoming exactly who they said you'd never be. So subscribe, stay with me, and let's build something built to last.